So today let's test out the Zotac 4070 Ti against an Asus 3090 Ti and see which one performs better, and to see which one has the best performance $2. So the 4070 Ti was purchased for $829 plus tax, and the 3090 Ti was purchased for $1,500 plus tax. So we're going to run a couple 3D Mark tests and then Cyberpunk and Forza Horizon 5 benchmarks. We're going to be testing at 1080p and 1440p with and without ray tracing on. So let's jump straight into the test with a Night Raid 3D Mark run. When comparing the specs, the 3090 Ti looks like it would be a much better card, as it has twice the memory bus and capacity, 75 more watts of power, over 3,000 more stream processors, more ray accelerators and compute units. And if none of that means anything to you, in simple terms, the 3090 Ti is just a more powerful card. But the main reason why the 4070 Ti is able to keep up is because it has 7.5 billion more transistors. Going back to simple terms, raising the transistor amount automatically increases the speed and performance by enabling more clock cycles per second, and this is why it's able to keep up with the 3090 Ti with half the memory. We saw something similar last year with the 3060 Ti. It has 4GB less of video RAM than the regular 3060, but it overall outperforms it by 29%. With that said, it's best not to get hung up on certain specifications when selecting your next GPU. It simply doesn't need as much memory to maintain around the same level of performance. Look at the clock speed difference between the two as well. The 4070 Ti is 27% faster due to the additional transistors combined with a new 4nm GPU chip. Really impressive right off the start, but my disclaimer is most benchmarks do not offer realistic tests. One GPU can outperform here by far, but fall short in certain games. Every game is different. Both of these GPUs will outperform each other by a decent margin from game to game. The 4070 Ti scored 3.91% better than the 3090 Ti. Now let's move on to a Port Royale benchmark. It's a much more demanding 3D gaming benchmark with heavy ray tracing at 1440p. It's looking like the 3090 Ti is going to pull ahead just a little bit. So we're speeding things up through this benchmark to go ahead and get to the scores and then move on to some more realistic in-game testing. The 3090 Ti pulls ahead by 4.37% over the 4070 Ti. Now let's move on to some Cyberpunk. So we're starting off at 1440p with ray tracing off and all settings are set to the max possible. In addition, no overclocking is being done on either one of these cards. The 40 series card is performing way better because of the frame regeneration. It's part of the new 4th generation tensor cores and optical flow accelerator. It uses AI to create additional high quality frames. It basically generates frames in between frames with minimum ghosting and artifacts. Now, I did run all these tests with the frame regeneration turned off, and the 40 series was still outperforming the 30 series by far. But for what it's worth, this feature is really nice. If the game that you play has it available, make sure to turn it on for even better performance. It's amazing to see a mid-range card that's not terribly overpriced perform this well, especially compared to a 3090 Ti. I mean, look at the 1% lows. It's been staying consistently in the 140s the whole time. Now, the 1% low is telling us that the worst 1% of the time, that's what the FPS is. I'm going to take this opportunity to call out a couple channels that have helped me out with some advice on the 1% and 0.1% lows. On my last video, some of the tests were not showing this data. Cyberpunk, for example, has no problem showing this data, as well as 3D Mark. So I figured there wasn't anything that I was doing wrong. So thank you both for the advice and assistance. Now for the results, the 40 series performed 32.53% more FPS. That's pretty amazing, and then look at the cost per frame. With ray tracing on, we see an even bigger gap in performance. And lastly, we have our 1080p results. Now let's drive around for a minute to see what the FPS difference is. Now we're seeing similar performance as was in the benchmark. This is at 1440p ray tracing off with the settings to max. The 40 series 1% lows are actually a little bit better now than they were in the benchmark. So let's watch just a little bit more of this gameplay and maybe even like like me crashing the car, that'd be cool, and then we'll move on to Forza Horizon 5. Boom, there's the crash. I did land it on the left-hand screen. So moving on to Forza, we're starting off at 1440p, all settings to max with ray tracing off. Note, this game does not have the frame regeneration. Hopefully that's something that we'll see in the near future. So far, there's not as much of a performance gap in this game as there was in Cyberpunk, probably because of the frame regeneration not being available. So I'll let this one benchmark play out and then we'll go to the results for all different settings we tested. Now for the results, pay attention to the cost per frame at the top of the screen. The 3090 Ti still did a really good job, but moving over to the 40 series, it performed 8% better as far as FPS. It had a few more frame stutters, but I think it's funny how the suggested preset is low for this GPU. Next up is 1440p with ray tracing on. The 40 series gaps the 3090 Ti even more. And then for 1080p. The cost per frame on the 40 series card is consistently at least half as much. Now moving over to gameplay, these settings are at 1440p max with ray tracing off. I'll let this play out while you observe the performance data and then we'll be back for a conclusion. As we saw today, the 4070 Ti is actually really impressive compared to the 3090 Ti, especially for the price. Although I feel like the 4070 Ti should be a little bit cheaper, you're still getting a lot of performance to the dollar. The 7900 XT and 7900 XTX are also good options if you're looking for an AMD card. Let us know in the comments below if you want us to test this 4070 Ti with a 3080. I feel like it's a more fair comparison from from generation to generation and price to price MSRP. Now, in other news, tomorrow we're giving away our first gaming computer. And if you miss out on this one, then there's going to be more to come. So please stay tuned to this channel because you never know when we're going to announce when the next giveaway will happen. But that'll about wrap it up for the day. And until then, we'll see you next time.